Hey there, welcome to The Inner Edge. Before I get into this particular episode, just want to say a big hello, I think, to maybe some new people listening to me rattle on every week in The Inner Edge here with this podcast. Over the last probably 6 months, been some interesting changes according to my stats machine in terms of who's listening to me going on and on and on about the inner side of business and life and sport. So I want to say a big shout out to people in the US and North America, people in Singapore, which has kind of climbed up the ranks over the last few months, which is interesting. Also, people in Canada and Ireland. I mean, I'm obviously Irish. I'm from Ireland. I'm just in a place called Wicklow, just south of Dublin, the capital. Ireland would normally have been the number one in terms of audience, but at the moment, since we came into 2026, Ireland is down number 4. So that's interesting. So there's lots, pretty much, I'm always surprised at how many countries or people I don't know whether people are traveling or how you found me, but um, I'd love to hear from you. So you can send an email to me anytime, hello@ShaneCradock.com, 1D, CRADOCK.com, SHANE, CRADOCK.com. Send me a note. Tell me where you're from. I'm curious as to how you found the podcast. I'm also open to what you're interested in, what kind of projects you're working on, how I can help you. You have a chance to shape what I talk about. So just want to say thanks for listening, and hopefully it's making a difference in whatever you're doing in your life. Today's episode is titled "Don't Die with Your Suit On." Very positive there, Shane. Well, first of all, you might be thinking, well, I don't really wear a suit, Shane. And it's funny, I was only thinking about this recently. I certainly don't wear a suit as often as I used to. Um, but but the message isn't really about the suit. It's more to do with, I suppose, the impact in relation to when you're kind of maybe ambitious for your life. Sometimes we can pay a price, I think, that we don't need to. And I suppose what I'm very curious about exploring is my potential, but what that includes is also having a life. And a client of mine said that particular line to me recently that kind of made me pause. Like, he just said, I don't want to die with my suit on. And of course, as I said, you may not wear a suit, maybe you do, but you get the idea. I mean, he didn't mean it literally. He didn't mean he wanted to get to the end of his life and realize what he meant, as you probably would guess, is that he didn't want to get to the end of his life and realize that he spent most of it working, building, achieving, solving problems, being the boss, being the leader, being the entrepreneur, whatever, being the person everybody else needed him to be, and that somewhere along the way, he forgot to take the suit off. And I think, as he said to me, there was some regrets. I think since we had started working together, he realized, I'm going to change the way that I'm doing. Because I think he saw the danger for ambitious people that you can become consumed by your work, by your career in a way without realizing that you are. And I think here's perhaps an uncomfortable truth. Your work is never done, ever. There'll always be another email. There's always another problem. There's always another target. There's always another opportunity. There's always another person who needs you. And there's always another level that you can reach. So if you're waiting for your work to be finished before you properly switch off and enjoy life and be present, I'm going to say you're probably going to be waiting for the rest of your life. So maybe the real question isn't, how do I get all my work done? Maybe the question is, how do I learn to put the work down mentally, even when it isn't done? And they're two very different skills. And if you can learn that second approach, weirdly, it actually makes your work performance better. Now, I actually think if we stick with the suit metaphor, there's two suits. There's the physical suit, and then there's the mental suit. The physical suit is where you physically leave the office, you close your laptop, you put the phone away, you go home, you go on holiday. That's all relatively easy. But then there's the mental suit, and that's invisible. It's much harder to take off. It can be as simple as you're sitting at dinner with your partner, with your family, but mentally you're still in the boardroom. You can be playing with your children and still solving mentally tomorrow's problems in work. You can be lying beside a beautiful place by a swimming pool on holidays, but mentally you're actually still sitting at your desk. Your body has left your work, but your mind hasn't. So you're not present. You're not here. Now, I think Everybody listening to this episode will relate to that if they're honest. And I think the distinction that matters is, taking time off isn't necessarily the same as taking your work off your mind. So this isn't an argument against ambition. I love ambition. I love working with people who want to build extraordinary things and achieve extraordinary things, achieve impossible things. But there is a point where ambition can quietly become consumption, where the business isn't simply something that you lead or your work isn't something that you do. It starts occupying your inner world at every waking moment. And because your work has no natural end point, eventually you really have to create one. Like, you have to decide, okay, that's enough for today. Not because everything is finished, because it never will be, but the skill of actually closing out your mind to say that is enough of that for today, and being able to make your mind do it, to understand that. That's a key aspect of, I think, inner mastery. It's what I would talk a lot about in terms of developing the inner CEO that you have inside. Now, let me give you an example. You've probably experienced something like this. Maybe it's a Friday evening. You finished for the week. Physically, you've gone home. But something happened at work, maybe during the day or during that week. Maybe it was a difficult conversation. Maybe there's one coming up, next week. Maybe it's a financial issue, a client problem. Maybe just something hasn't gone to plan. And then on Saturday morning over the weekend, you're having breakfast, but part of you mentally is still at work. You go for a walk later on, maybe with, your partner, it's still there. You meet friends, it's still there. You're watching a film that night with your family and suddenly realize you haven't taken in the last few minutes because you've been thinking about the problem. You're thinking about Monday. You're off work, but you haven't taken the mental suit off. So the cost isn't only stress, it's actually absence. Like, you're physically in one life and mentally living somewhere else. You're not here. And again, everybody has done this. Everybody can relate to it, but maybe we just think it's the way of the modern world. And that's what I'm challenging. And I think if I go back to, what my client said about not wanting to die with my suit on, what struck me was that he wasn't saying, I don't want to work anymore. It was quite the opposite, actually. He's very ambitious. He's a successful person. He cares about what he's building and he wants to achieve more. What he was questioning was the price that he was paying or that he paid already. How much of me do I want the work to own? And I think that there is a subtle trap that happens as you achieve more success. Your work becomes part of your identity. You're a founder, you're a CEO, you're a great leader, you're an entrepreneur, you're a great sports person, you're a great whatever. And there's nothing wrong with those identities until you forget that they're roles. They're just roles that you're playing. They're not the totality of who you really are. I mean, sometimes taking the suit off means remembering the person underneath it. And very often that person gets lost. It's not until, for example, somebody maybe retires or sells a business that they get this crisis of identity because they realize, oh, I've lost my identity. It's very, very common. But why wait until that happens? To give you an analogy, think about an actor walking off stage. For 2 hours, they might have completely inhabited a character. They've thought like them. They've spoken like them. They feel like them. And eventually the curtain comes down. They walk backstage. I've done it myself. I'm a fan of amateur dramatics. I grew up in a house where, my mother was an actress and a director in the amateur scene. So we were all encouraged to do it. And I've had that experience myself, that you think about this character but imagine if you came off stage and you never took, the costume off. You never became yourself again. Famously, like a lot of famous actors like Daniel Day-Lewis are kind of renowned for doing this. That they can go home in character, they can have breakfast in character, they can operate in character even when they've stopped filming. But if that was real life, and somebody, your friend was doing that, you'd say, hey, you've forgotten. That's just the role you're playing. And I wonder how often we actually do that with work, as the CEO, the founder, the leader. They're all important roles, even a parent, but you are not the role. You have different roles that you play in your life. That's normal. But maybe part of living well is knowing when the curtain has come down for the day. that you can actually say, okay, stop that now. And I think that's where this is much more than a time management conversation or productivity, because you can block out an evening in your diary, you can book a holiday, you can turn off notifications. They're all things you can do. People do them. They're all useful. But none of that guarantees that you'll actually be here in the moment. And I think the deeper skill really is being able to put something down internally, mentally, to notice, okay, I'm home, but my mind is still in work. And being able to kind of move your attention away from that distracted mind. And rather than fighting the thinking or trying to force yourself to relax, just that recognition that you've got the suit still on actually really helps the mind to settle, because you realize, no, hold on, that's just a habit. That allows you to come back to where you are in the moment. And when the mental noise drops, something really interesting happens. You get more of your capacity back as a person, your capacity. You become more available. You become more available to your partner, your family, your children, your friends, to nature, to ideas that even will help your work or whatever you do. And most importantly, you become more available to yourself. And ironically, I think, as I said, all of that contributes to you being better then when you go back to do whatever your work is, because you come back with a fresh perspective. And that is so valuable. You have more energy, more creativity, better judgment. You actually become better at wearing the suit of work, of your career, because you've learned how to take it off. So some questions that I want to leave you with. First one is, where in your life are you physically present, but mentally still at work? Do you even recognize it? Second one is, what are you waiting to finish before you give permission to properly enjoy your life? Because I've met so many people, I've done it myself. When I get to this point, then I will stop and relax. But what you will find is that really never happens. I've worked with so many people with success at different levels in business, in sport, in creativity, in media. Like, it just doesn't happen. And then the third one is, and this is a biggie, who are you when you're not wearing the suit? And if that question feels difficult or awkward to answer, that's a signal to me that it's definitely worth sitting with. So let me close out by saying, look, work matters, achievement matters. And I think, I'm a fan of people who build meaningful things, and building something meaningful is one of the great privileges of a life. But work is unusual, because if you're not careful, it will take as much of you as you're prepared to give it. And there's always more for it to give it. There's always more. So what I'm saying is, and I have to watch this myself, is, look, I don't want to wait for the inbox to be empty. It'll never happen. I don't want to wait for the business to finally settle down. It rarely does. I don't want to wait until I've hit the number before I enjoy myself or relax. I don't want to wait for somebody else to give me permission. At some point, I think you have to decide, when is enough enough? By the way, here's a really, really bad joke. Really bad. I'm warning you now in advance, okay? I said, you have to decide, when is enough enough? But the joke is, when is enough enough? And the answer is, when it's an egg in France. Enough is enough. See what I did there? Anyway, the point to close out is, can you leave the problem where it is? Can you come back to the people in front of you, the people that you say matter most? Can you come back to yourself? Because your work, it's an important part of your life, but it isn't your life. And I think maybe one of the great skills of ambitious living is knowing how to give everything to your work when you're in it, and then knowing how to leave it behind when you're not. Build the business, create the impossible dream, do work that matters. But just remember to take the suit off while there's still plenty of life left to live. That's it for this week. Ciao for now.